Being a series that's been around for 19 years, Monster Hunter has its fair share of titles that, sadly, have been abandoned and lost to time. These games have either stopped production altogether or the platform that allowed for their distribution has ceased to operate and exist. So in today's video, I will be going over some of the more obscure, discontinued and forgotten Monster Hunter titles that you may have never heard of, as well as some of the games you already love that simply cannot be currently played through any legal means. If I show you anything that you didn't know before, consider subscribing, as only 1% of the people that watch me are actually subscribed, and I would really like to change that. With that being said, hello hunters, my name is Dark Hero and let's begin. The first game we're going to be taking a look at is Monster Hunter Online, the MMORPG released only in China back in 2015. Although the base for this game was the traditional Monster Hunter experience where you hunt monsters to craft gear from the materials you collect and gather, combat was much flashier while retaining most of each weapon's core moveset. But it was the crazy new monsters, the huge variety of armor sets and the loads and loads of content to play through, along with the online hub and other typical MMO systems that set it apart from any other Monster Hunter title in the series. I played this one a little bit back in 2018 through the use of a VPN, but it was all in Chinese, so I didn't really know what I was doing most of the time. Sadly, the game was shut down on the 31st of December 2019 as Capcom and Tencent had ended their partnership. The game's closure was met with disappointment from its dedicated player base, and what I hear from the very few people that actually played it, the game is still remembered fondly. Unfortunately, we never got to see any of these monsters that were introduced in online in any other game in the series, and I fear that may be the case going forward. It's a shame to see a game with so much content be shut down, because some of these weapons and armor sets just look incredible and I would like to see them released in any other title in the future. Now, what if I told you there is a Monster Hunter anime featuring big booba waifus? This is Monster Hunter Mesoporta Reclamation, a Monster Hunter spin-off only released in Japan that can be described as a strategy game of sorts, where the player takes on the role of a guildmaster who must help reclaim wild lands while expanding their own territory by gathering materials and hunting monsters. Combat in Mesoporta Reclamation is your typical turn-based RPG, but in order to do so, players would have to traverse these grids where you choose where to move to either look for minerals, herbs and other consumables, or to face off against different monsters. Perhaps more interesting is the game's other focus, a city builder of sorts, something akin to Farmville and games of that kind, as you would upgrade different buildings and expand the villages. But most surprising of all is the fact that this game was made to be playable on your browser. Mesoporta Reclamation launched in November of 2014 and was discontinued in 2017, not even reaching its third anniversary before it got shut down. Capcom seemingly had high hopes for Mesoporta Reclamation, given that it even got an animated opening to further advertise the game. Sadly, I couldn't find which studio was behind it, but despite how silly it may look, it makes me wish for an actual Monster Hunter anime, other than Monster Hunter Stories. This game features beautiful art, and even the smaller chibi art style of the hunters in the villages you would customize look adorable. The game may not have been successful, but I do wish Capcom utilizes some of these assets elsewhere in the future. Now, if the name Mesoporta Reclamation sounded familiar to you, that is most likely because you played Monster Hunter Frontier, the other Monster Hunter MMORPG that was not released in China but was available in Asia. This game is much more well known in the Monster Hunter community, as it features some of the craziest monsters that have ever existed in the series, as well as 3 new weapons that people really wish would be added to the current and future entries in the series. I'm talking about the Tonfas, Magnetic Spike and the Axle Axe. This game was meant to ride on the trend of MMORPGs, and expanded from the Japanese exclusive Monster Hunter dose and kept on adding content through various different updates, being online from 2007 up until it was shut down in 2019, having a very impressive 12-year run. The termination of Monster Hunter Frontier was a big loss for the Monster Hunter community. While the game may not have been sustainable or profitable enough for Capcom to maintain it online, there's still a large community of players that absolutely love Monster Hunter Frontier, and as such there are many private servers still available and operating to this day. I don't want to say too much about it for obvious reasons, and I'm also working on a video dedicated to Monster Hunter Frontier, so be on the lookout for that. Now this Monster Hunter game is one that I had actually never heard of before researching for this video. A card collecting turn-based arcade game made by the developers of Stories 1 and 2 by the name of Monster Hunter Spirits. The concept of this game is pretty neat. You'd be able to hunt monsters, collect their cards, and fight alongside them, something that most likely led to the creation of what we now know as Monster Hunter Stories. That being said, you could be forgiven for thinking that this is actually Monster Hunter Stories gameplay, as not only are some of the gameplay mechanics similar, but the cel-shaded visuals of Stories are also present here as well. The most notable differences, other than Spirits being played on arcade machines and using cards to activate several effects, is the fact that the monster models are the same ones that you see in the 3DS Monster Hunter titles, but with a different shading and some retexturing done on top to make it more fitting for this kind of game. And of course, we also get to see the baby versions of all these imposing and powerful monsters, which simply look adorable. Monster Hunter Spirits, despite being one of the least known games in the series, is probably also one of its most important spin-offs, as it led to the successful Monster Hunter Stories and its sequel, which I am very fond of, so for that I'm glad that Capcom took a risk with such a different kind of game. Now these next two games, I will be going through them very quickly as there is not much that can be said about them. Released in 2011, Monster Hunter Massive Hunting and Monster Hunter Dynamic Hunting are two different mobile titles that are very much a product of their time, as Capcom tried to launch Monster Hunter into the mobile market by making what is essentially a much more dumbed down version of the classic Gen 1 and 2 Monster Hunter portable titles. That being said, the game's combat was much different than that of the traditional Monster Hunter games, as it featured things such as a counter gauge and ultimate attacks, and the hunter's movement and camera would be effectively locked to the monster. Capcom would later on release, among other titles, Monster Hunter Freedom Unite for mobile devices, a beloved title which, of course, is able to provide an actual Monster Hunter experience to its players and therefore may act as a better introductory point to the series compared to these two titles. The following games are ones that I am very sad to be reporting to be a part of this list. Games that can no longer be accessed in any legal way. I'm talking about the 3DS Monster Hunter titles, Monster Hunter Generations, 4 Ultimate and 3 Ultimate. The Nintendo eShop has recently shut down, and as such, a plethora of amazing titles are no longer able to be purchased online. The only way for you to get your hands on these games legally is to buy them physically, and of course if you go on eBay or Amazon, you're probably going to need to pay a large sum to get your hands on them. Sadly, we haven't really seen Capcom show much interest in trying to preserve the history of the Monster Hunter series. Like, for example, simply making these titles now accessible on the Nintendo Switch, with of course a few changes because these games were initially made for the Nintendo 3DS. But for example, Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate was available on both the 3DS and Wii U, so I feel like that game could be instantly ported over to the Nintendo Switch and people would be happy with it. Of course, the even older titles in their series have already gone through this, If you want to buy a copy of Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, for example, that is going to cost you a lot, so the best next thing is going to be emulation. I'm not sure how happy Capcom is about me talking about that here in the video, but it's a shame that Capcom hasn't done what they have done with Resident Evil for the Monster Hunter series, where they have done amazing remasters and remakes for their games where people absolutely love Resident Evil 2, 3 and now 4. I've been playing a lot of Freedom Unite recently. It's probably the game that I played the most in my childhood, and it is one of my favorite older titles in the series, along with 4 Ultimate of course, which many people regard as being the best title in the entire Monster Hunter franchise. But I wish I would be able to play these games on my PC with better graphics, or even a little bit more of quality of life changes. Maybe that is a discussion that needs to be had with the community. How would Capcom need to go about remastering or remaking these titles? Should they change things? Should they change any of the mechanics, like for example making pickaxes and bug nets consumable items? Or perhaps you wish paintballs would be removed because they bother you or you happen to forget about them sometimes? I do have one more title that I want to show you, but let me know how you guys feel about this in the comment section below, because I feel like it is a rather relevant topic to talk about. Now, the final Monster Hunter game that I want to talk about that has been lost to time is none other than the infamous Monster Hunter Rise. A very strange mobile Monster Hunter title that doesn't have a lot of information available online. SuperRed has actually made a really good video about this, and along with his community, he was actually able to make a playable version of this game that he has actually made playable for anyone that wants to actually give it a try. So a huge shout out for SuperRed for the footage that you see here, but also for trying to preserve another part of Monster Hunter history. As we get these digital titles, some of them are inevitably going to be lost, and as such, it should be applauded whenever someone strives to make sure that these games are still available. Monster Hunter Rise is essentially a port of Monster Hunter G for the PlayStation 2, although it's missing a couple of monsters, Kezu and Fatalis, but it does have some weird twists. For starters, it has random encounters. Once you embark on a quest, as you traverse through the maps, your screen will eventually fade to black and you'll be transported to an arena where you actually get to fight monsters. If it's not the target monster of your quest, you can either defeat them or attempt to flee by running towards the edge of the arena. You'll know you're in the same area as the target monster, as the music will shift, and you'll also see a Monster Eye icon appear. As you can see, Monster Hunter Rise features a much more simplistic aesthetic so as to be playable on mobile devices at the time. Most notably, the village is shown in this top-down static view and you would select which facility you would like to visit from a drop-down menu. As for the hunts, well, this weird perspective along with touchscreen controls probably made for a very clunky experience, maybe even a lot worse than what people say about the classic PlayStation 2 Monster Hunter game. I wouldn't know about it since I've never played it before, but in the next couple of days I'm going to be playing it to see if it's as bad as people say it is, or perhaps I'm going to like it more than the recent entries in the series. Oh, I really hope I like this one. My name is Dark Hero, and as always, happy hunting.